was some time ago that she and I went to Israel together, and it seemed that most people at that time, people were thinking that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was about borders, about boundaries, about who got what land. Obviously, if you don't understand the true nature of a problem, it's not very likely that you're going to solve it, and in some cases, you could end up doing more harm than good. You look back to the World War II days, 1930s, we saw, or we thought that the Hitler problem was about reuniting the German nations, that was bringing together Austria, and so the world nodded as he took in Austria and appeased, of course, as he took on the Sudetenland. Of course, that was not what Hitler was about. It was not about boundaries. It was about his ambition to conquer the world and to eliminate races of human beings. Now, Israeli-Palestinian boundaries are not the issue in the Middle East, nor is the plight and nor is the plight and poverty of the Palestinian people the issue in the Middle East either. That could have been solved long ago by the extraordinary oil wealth of their friendly Arab neighbors. In fact, it's also not about establishing a Palestinian state. As Tony Blair, I think, very famously said, the conflict and fighting is not about the coming into being of a Palestinian state. It is for the going out of being of an Israeli state. The real problem is that jihadists want to conquer the world. They want to eradicate a Jewish state and the Jewish people. You saw, of course, the report from George Tenet in his book saying that Osama bin Laden sees the acquisition of nuclear weapons as a religious imperative. Think about that. He sees it as a religion to get nuclear weapons. Clerics have also issued fatwas, as you know, allowing the use of nuclear weapons against the infidels. And a nation that is speaking about genocide is rushing headlong to develop the capacity to carry out genocide. Now, to the liberal mind, and I have a few of them in Massachusetts, this is all too hard to believe. They frankly do not understand it. They do not believe it. I went to a memorial service relating to the 9/11 tragedy, and the minister who stood up got up and said that it was time for us to focus on the root causes of terrorism, lack of good housing and lack of good health care. And yeah, it's just extraordinary what you hear in the liberal world. And of course, then Jimmy Carter gets up and says that the remember that old Rodney Dangerfield line, "Take Jimmy Carter, please." He thinks was that Henny Youngman? I'm not giving it to the right. I thought it was Rodney. It was Henny Youngman. He said, of course, that the security fence is keeping peace from coming to the Holy Land. I've been there. I realize that the security fence is keeping violence from overrunning the Holy Land. And so it seems that the political mind in the United States is divided into two camps. On one side, you have virtually all the Democrats that see the Palestinian issue as the root cause of the conflict in the Middle East. And they somehow believe that if you take the Baker-Hamilton, wave of the wand over Israel and you solve it, that all the jihadists will go away. And they also, of course, see that what's going on in Iraq and Afghanistan is a national matter within boundaries, that it's not something of a global nature. The other camp, where Republicans reside and where some good people like Joe Lieberman reside as well, see a single conflict rooted in ancient history with radical Islamic jihadists intent on causing the collapse of the entire civilized world. Destroying Israel is simply a way station on their road to do all of that. And the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq are not isolated wars, but are fronts in the global war against us, a global war being waged by violent, radical jihadists. Now, you might ask, isn't there some truth to both views? No, there's not. We're right and they're wrong. In the face of what is an existential threat from jihadists, many in the Democratic Party are in the most serious, delusional, and politically driven denial since Neville Chamberlain. Based upon an understanding of the real war, let me offer a couple of, well, actually, I'm going to try 4 policy imperatives. And I'm going to go through these, I hope, pretty quickly. First, we've got to succeed in Iraq and Afghanistan. At a minimum, to me, success means making sure that Hezbollah and Hamas do not have safe havens from which they would launch their attacks in the world. Now, the Democrats, of course, deny that Iraq has a central role in the war against global terrorism. and they want to cause a precipitous withdrawal of our troops, hoping somehow that Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah would just simply go home, despite the fact that Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah have said that if we were to precipitously withdraw, they would immediately fill the vacuum. That's why, of course, that the surge has been so essential. It has allowed Sunnis to come to their senses and to work with us to reject Al-Qaeda safe havens. And it is also why I know that the blood and sacrifice of servicemen and servicewomen has not been in vain. We have fought and eliminated safe haven after safe haven. It seems that the Democrats don't have a strategy for Iraq, for Iran, for the violence of the global jihad, and particularly for Iran. And that leads me to a second imperative, and that is that Iran must be stopped. Ahmadinejad has obviously gone well beyond the bound of outrage when he calculatedly desecrates human history. He denies the Holocaust, but in fact, his denial is not about history. It's about the present, and it's about the future. He's denying the Holocaust to see how people respond. He's doing what an evil person did before him, to see whether he can get the human mind to acquiesce in the destruction of a people and a nation. On Quds Day, you saw that he spoke before thousands and thousands of Iranians. He printed out bibs with phrases on them: death to Israel, death to America. He's testing the water. He wants to know how people will react. He wants to see if we can accommodate the views which he has about the future of Israel. This was, of course, not just Ahmadinejad, but also former President of Iran, Khatami, who said about Hamas these things. He said, Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the shining sun that illuminates and warms the hearts of all Muslims and supporters of freedom in the world. And yet when Harvard University invited Khatami to come speak on the eve of September 11th, the media and Washington elites praised him as a moderate. By the way, I took a different course. I received a call asking if we would provide state police resources to accompany his caravan going from the airport to Harvard. And I said, no way. I was delighted, by the way, to go with Mel Sembler and many others to go to Israel right after my term of governor was over. We were there in January. I gave a speech at the Herzliya conference, as Mel indicated. It focused on Iran and trying to elevate the awareness associated with Iran, and also to see if we can't develop a more comprehensive strategy for action. And then I got a chance to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu, an old friend, and after that meeting, I called on a number of states and major pension plans to divest from investments in Iranian businesses. I also called on the United Nations Secretary General to withdraw his confounding, strange invitation to Ahmadinejad to use the forum of the United Nations General Assembly for his propaganda. In my view, as the ambassador indicated, rather than be invited to New York, he should have been indicted in New York. And the reason being that the Genocide Convention specifically calls out as a potential source of indictment incitation to genocide, and there's no question that that's exactly what Ahmadinejad is doing. Now, some Democrats think it's possible to live with a nuclear Iran. That thinking, I believe, is based upon the view that somehow if Iran has developed is given the capacity to develop nuclear weaponry and join the nuclear club, that they'll become a responsible actor. But frankly, there has been no word or no action from Iran's leaders in the last quarter of a century to suggest that they would be a responsible player. There are others in the democratic world who believe in the logic of deterrence, and they point out that served us well through the Cold War. In fact, the Soviet Union was deterred from its ambition, in part because of our nuclear deterrence. But for all of the Soviet Union's deep flaws, they were never suicidal. The Soviet commitment to national survival was never in question, and that assumption can simply not be made about an irrational regime that celebrates martyrdom, as Iran does. It's time for Democrats to break their silence and answer this question: will you act to stop a nuclear Iran? Let me assure you of one thing: I will.